Good evening. Hi, and welcome to the Applicants Forum for the Civilian Review Board. My name is Mitsuko Clemens Nazir, and I will be co-facilitating this evening's discussion along with my partner in crime here. I didn't mean to use the word crime. That was just, go for it.
My name is Bob Garrity. I'll be facilitating along with Mitsuko.
And we thank you for joining us this evening.
We'd like to make one announcement that we are live streaming this on Facebook. There are 2 cameras in the back, so if you choose to stand, can you please not stand in front of the cameras, because then it'll be hard for them to stream. And then you might want to text your friends or send notes to your friends to see this on live stream if they wish, on Facebook. Pardon me? We're on Facebook. Tech support. I don't know the answer to that.
The Charlottesville City page? Yes, the Charlottesville City page. So there is a resolution that is associated with this event and with the organization, and I'd like to read some things as follows. The Civilian Review Board was recently established by a resolution of the Charlottesville City Council on December 18th, 2017. The council's resolution is posted on the city's CRB page, which can be found by visiting charlottesville.org/boards. That again is charlottesville.org/boards. And selecting a police civilian review board, that information is located on the left-hand side of the page, just in case you need more information. The resolution states that in forming the board, the city will host an applicant forum to give each applicant the opportunity to speak to the community and the council about their interests and qualifications, as well as receive and answer questions from the community. So we are grateful for all of our applicants' time, and we are grateful for your time as well to contribute to this discussion. So this is that evening that we'll be holding that forum. We have 13 applicants, and as you can see, everyone is represented except for one. This number will be broken down into a 7-person board. We are grateful to them for devoting their time again and serving our community, and we do look forward to hearing from each and every one of them. Bob?
Thank you. The agenda for this evening is available on the programs that were found on the table when you entered the auditorium. And the agenda is also posted on the City's Civilian Review Board webpage, which may be found by visiting charlottesville.org/boards, as Mitsuko mentioned before.
So, at this point, we would love for you to have an opportunity to meet the candidates. And so we invite you to introduce yourselves, please. And we will just, we'll just go down the line here with this.
My name is Gloria Beard.
Josh Bowers. Evan Brown.
My name is Sarah Burke.
My name is Jeff Fogel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Don Gathers.
Hello, my name is Juan Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. My name is Rosia Parker.
I'm Helen Plaisance.
My name is Jim Shea.
Katrina Turner.
My name is Guillermo Ubilla.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for letting us know your names, and thank you for being here tonight. So our purpose this evening is to hear from each of the applicants for the board, so they can share their interests, their ideas, and qualifications for being a member of the board. We're asking the public to participate by submitting questions to the applicants. We want you to listen carefully to the applicants and submit questions that you would like them to answer by putting them in the box over where Brian Wheeler is standing way across the way. Brian's in the gray suit waving at us right now. When you came in, you probably noticed a basket with small cards and pens. So while you're listening to the opening statements of each of the applicants, we ask that you, if you wish, to write down a question. And then we'll collect the questions and have them put in the box, and then we'll, kind of like the lottery, put a hand in there and pull out a question and pose it to the group. And we'll follow that procedure throughout the evening. And I'd also be grateful if you would set your cell phones on silent or off. If you need to take a call or make a call, please exit the auditorium and then return to the forum when you're done. Submitting questions. As I mentioned, we've provided the cards and the pens, and during their opening statements, feel free to think about a question, jot it down, and we ask also that you please write your name on the card that you submit the question with. That way we can read the question and your name to the panel. If the card does not have a name on it, we won't be able to use that card or that question. At the end of the opening statements, we will collect the cards, and if another question comes to mind, feel free to write another question and hold it up during the forum, and Brian will come near you and collect it from you. Applicants, you will have up to 2 minutes to answer the question when it is posed. We'll keep track of participation. When each of you answers a question, we'll mark your participation on the spreadsheet, which I have over here, in order to balance participation. You may want to use the entire 2 minutes. You may want to pass on the question. It's up to you. If you pass on the question, then you'll be one of the first to answer the next question. But feel free to choose to answer whatever you wish. Any questions? So now what we'd like to do is have the opening statements from each of the participants.
So that you understand how this was picked, as you can see, everyone is sitting here in alphabetical order, and we just created a process 5 minutes ago on how we're going to answer questions. Each of the applicants selected a number. I jotted down an actual number. Whomever fit the closest to that number without going over would be the first person to answer the question. As we have consecutive questions go on, we'll just move to the next person down the line going to Z, okay? Does that make sense? So the first person who is going to be sharing her opening statement would be Ms. Burke. So you do have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Burke, and I first just want to say that I got to read everybody's biographies, and I'm really impressed with everybody here, and really pleased to be part of this process. I grew up in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area, and for the past 10 years, I have been working as a criminal defense investigator and mitigation specialist. Most of my cases involve defendants who are charged with capital eligible offenses, so facing capital murder charges or other serious offenses. And my interest particularly in that work is to work on behalf of people that often are not likable characters within our society, and to try to provide every person access to a just sentence and to a just outcome of their case. I first heard about this after having some discussions with people in the community about some of the issues that I had heard about police and community encounters, and was really pleased to hear that this board was being reestablished, and decided to apply because I believe that it's an important thing to bridge the community and the police together, to be able to address issues that the community has, and to review the process that the police uses in order to process complaints. I believe that transparency is important. I believe in holding public officials accountable, and I believe that can be done by working very closely with the community, mostly the community members who are most affected by police contact, and also to work with the police department to make sure that what we are doing is the appropriate mechanism, and to develop that from doing research from other community civilian review boards.
15.
So I look forward to working with the community and to having more outreach with the people who are most affected by police contact in this particular community. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Good evening. Again, my name is Jeff Fogel. There's no question that there are serious issues in our police department. Just look at what happened July 8th, look what happened August 12th. But the most serious problem is what Sarah already alluded to, which is the relationship between the police department and the African American community, the historical background of that and of the current situation. The most graphic example of that problem is something that I've been tracking and publicizing for 5 years, which are stop and frisk statistics. And what's particularly concerning is not just the fact that of the hundreds of people that are stopped each year who did nothing, 70 to 80% of them have been African American. That's a shocking number. But you know what's even more shocking? Is that city government has not cared about this issue until now. That we've gone through 5 years of pressing this issue before the city council, before the police department, before the city manager. And not one of them has taken any action whatsoever to deal with this issue, not even to look into it and offer an explanation to the citizenry as to why this is happening. So it is most appropriate that we have some civilian review, some civilian oversight, some civilian control over the police department that is not dependent on politicians and that is not dependent on sworn, paid law enforcement officers. Now, there are going to be a lot of rocky roads along the way here, because whether this organization is going to be effective or not is going to depend on a number of factors. And those factors are going to be important as to whether or not we are successful, whether or not that success can be measured in terms of the relationship where the police department has with the African American community.
15.
And it's been terrible.
15.
And we have to do something about it. My resume relevant to this issue is well laid out in the brochure. I don't need to repeat it. I'm going to pass it on to my good friend Don Gathers.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Fogel.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming out this evening. This is important work that we've taken the task on to do. My name is Don Gathers, deacon in a local church, husband, father, local activist, and concerned citizen. We've got some real sincere issues and problems here in Charlottesville. And unfortunately, many of them do center around interactions with the police department. We've got to figure out how we can climb that hurdle and overcome some of those interactions. And the biggest elephant, or even the herd of elephants in the room, is a lack of trust. Especially from the minorities, the black communities, there's a void of trust with interactions with the police. We've got to figure out how to, if not overcome it, at least try to bridge that divide and close that chasm somewhat. We've got a lot of work to do, and it takes a lot of serious-minded people in order to do it. The council has a panel full of interesting and talented people to pick from, and we've just got to figure out how to work through these issues and work together, because God help us that we see some of the incidents that we've seen go on in other parts of the country. We don't want any police officer involved shootings where it comes down to a question at all of race. And the stop and frisk issues, they seem to center around traffic, as do these incidents that have occurred around the country. If we can get a handle on some of these issues, and if we can get a handle on how we review these issues, hopefully, prayerfully, we won't come to that point.
15.
So again, thank you all very much for coming out, and look forward to your questions this evening.
Done? Good evening. My name is Juan Gonzalez. Can you be able to see in the biography, in the brochure that everyone have? I'm gonna be right through with you. I'm just being here for a short while since the last summer. I was volunteering with Sin Barreras. It's a Latino organization here that do a lot of working with immigrants and the Latino community in general, also with the Legal Aid Justice Centers. When I was in Sin Barreras, they told me of this initiative going on of the Police Civilian Review Board, and they asked me if I was interested as opportunity to be an intermediate between the Latino community specifically, of course, and then And of course, I call my attention, and I think it's a very important initiative as a right, it's the right step. It's working as democracy, not only as a representative system, but also a participative system that we all have the opportunity to embrace and have a follow-up on the policies that's going on in the police department. So I think that is very important. I know that I've not been here a lot of times, so I don't know very well a lot of the issues exactly of the community around here. And I've been reading the biography of my fellow partners here, and they are really good and understanding. So I would be glad if I can help to this commission, even from inside, appointed member, or from outside. I would be glad to help you as an ad hoc member. But if you find that I can help you, I would be very glad to help and be honest with you. I'm willing to work in the purposes of this commission. I think I can help a lot. I am an attorney in Puerto Rico. I've been working in different organizations there regarding civil and human rights, as a member of boards and different organizations. So I would think it's a very important opportunity to also, in this stage of this commission, moving forward to help draft the bylaws and the vision of this committee. So if you think I can help, I will be glad to be part of it. If not, also I'm available to be around. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Rosie Parker, and the reason I'm here is because since I've been here in Charlottesville, I've been here for 13 years, and I've watched the abuse of the police in low-income communities, not only in low-income communities, but just Black people in general being here in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. And the disproportion of the abuse that I've seen is not very tolerated by myself and the community, but there are a lot of people in the community that cannot speak up for themselves. So I'm willing to be able to stand up and speak for those ones that can't speak for themselves. Not only have I watched the police abuse my youth and my Black men, but I've also been abused myself by the police officer. Matter of fact, one of the police officers are here this evening, and I feel a little bit somewhat intimidated by having some of these particular police officers that we are having situations with being here in the building. But that's good that maybe that they would be able to learn transparency, that they would be able to communicate with us in the community. Well, it's been well over years that I've sat on different boards and different organizations trying to confront police officers in different things that have taken place in Charlottesville that have not been taking place as far as mental health issues, how they approach people with mental health issues, and they continue to abuse their privileges of being a police officer in that manner. So therefore, the people that are being abused, they're going to jail, and maybe that shouldn't have been a place that they would have went, knowingly that if the police had been trained to be able to handle a situation better. Far as our youth, I've watched the police put their hands on youth. I've watched them drag them down the street. I've watched them throw them against police cars. I've watched them talk to them in any kind of manner that they felt that they could talk to them because they were Black and that they were young and they felt that they didn't have no right to be able to say anything.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Helen Plaisance, and my reason for being here began probably this summer when I read about and saw what had happened on August 11th and 12th. When I applied, I read the application, I read the information about what was being requested, and I thought to myself, that's a pretty tall order. The first step is building the organization. Then I went back and I read the resolution in its entirety, and I went back and did some research just on the internet to see what else I could find. And I learned that in the past there have been police advisory groups dating back to the 90s and perhaps even earlier than that. That was very troubling because clearly there have been things that have not gone well, and yet here we are in 2018 and nothing yet has been found that works. So then I went back and I also read the article in Seaville that Jordy Yeager had written, detailing some of the history of the problems. And I looked back at the resolution, and it dawned on me that this is an incredible opportunity where the city is asking us to build a community of trust. That is something they're looking for in one of the most difficult spots in the city, in the police department. I think that the group that will be selected to do this must build that community of trust themselves first. They are going to have to get over their differences. They're going to have to find common ground to develop a procedure to develop a thing that does this work. And I would very much love to be part of that. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jim Shea. I've lived in Charlottesville for over 40 years. I'm a longtime social activist, retired university employee. I have, like most people in this room, I have serious concerns about the Charlottesville Police Department, one of which arises from their behavior last summer during the disturbances of July and August, when they simply failed to fulfill their basic responsibility to maintain public order and protect life and property. The public has an absolute right to demand reasonable, credible assurances from city officials and the police department that this pathetic behavior will not repeat itself in the future. Another area of concern for me, at least as important as that, is the long-standing, ongoing racial bias in local law enforcement. We have the evidence of the police department's own statistics, which show that in Charlottesville, a black person is 10 times more likely than anybody else to be subjected to what the police like to call stop and frisk. This is a clear violation of the constitutional protection, constitutional guarantee that every citizen has, regardless of race, for equal protection under the law. We have in Charlottesville some number of police officers who abuse their authority to bully, intimidate, humiliate, terrorize the black people of our city. Folks, this has got to stop. And priority number one for this review board has got to be to see to it that it does stop. Thank you.
My name is Katrina Turner. I applied for this board because, one, I've been fighting, not the police all my life, but I've been fighting. I had a son who had cerebral palsy. I had to fight for his rights in school, get a child advocate. I've carried people to court, my next door neighbors, because their dogs attacked my dogs, and nobody else in the neighborhood wanted to fight with me, so I did the fight by myself and got the dog deemed vicious. April 30th, 2016, my son called me and told me his girlfriend had just attacked him. My son called the police. I live a minute away from him. I was there literally right after the police got there. When they brought my son out of the house after he called for help, they arrested him. In front of me, they slammed him against the wall. They slammed him against the police car twice, threw a set of keys and hit him in the back of his head, and said he was resisting arrest when he was handcuffed from the time he was in his bedroom to the time he got to the police car. So after my son and I filed a complaint, the complaint came back, of course, that we didn't tell the truth. So I've been fighting the police department for almost 2 years over a complaint that I'm not gonna stop fighting. And being on this board, if this board can help hold these police accountable for what they're doing? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Guillermo Ubia. I've been in Charlottesville since 2005, living here, working here, and except for 1 year where I moved away but missed it so much that I moved back. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that it took the election of 2016 to really open my eyes to what is going on in the world around me and in the city around me. And since then, I've been working to try to educate myself, and I'm here tonight because I'm trying to be an active participant in making the city that I love a better place. Like other people have said up here, I'm really impressed with the bios of everybody, and I'm happy to be a part of this process. Whoever is ultimately selected, I think a couple of things are really important for the board, whatever shape it takes, not just for the 7 people selected for next year, but in the long run, I think the board really needs to focus on transparency. I think the police department needs to be transparent, the city government needs to be transparent, and the board itself needs to be transparent. Without transparency, we're not going to have trust, and without trust, we're not really going to make any changes. And then I also think this board really needs to have some teeth to it. This can't be just the advisory panel that we've had since the 1990s. Whether that is investigative powers, subpoena powers, whether that's, say, in hiring personnel, without some teeth to it, without some authority, we're not going to make any change. And thank you all for being here tonight.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gloria Beard, and I've lived in Charlottesville for 44 years. And I've seen a lot change since I've been here. And I would like to be able to help solve some of our problems. I work well with people. I'm a people person, and I have people skills. I have applied for this because I think this is a very important board. We just have to work together somehow, because after August the 12th, it really shocked me what was going on in Charlottesville. And when our police force stood down, it troubled me so bad. I just didn't understand why that happened. And I always believed in justice and truth ever since I was a little girl. I really do. And transparency and also accountability is very important. So I hope I can work together with whoever or they choose to be on this board to help make Charlottesville a better place to be. Because I have 3 sons and all of my children left because of a lot of issues here in Charlottesville. So they left me here, but I love my community, I love the people, and I'm willing to do my very best. So I thank y'all very much.
Thank you for having me here tonight. Again, my name is Josh Bowers. I'm a professor of law at the University of Virginia School of Law. I write about and teach about criminal justice reform, and I advocate for criminal justice reform. Write and teach about community policing and community justice, restorative justice, problems of excessive force, stop and frisk, which a number of the other people on this panel have already spoken about. Problems of police misconduct, prosecutorial discretion. I advocate for decriminalization of public order crimes, for means of offender reentry, shortcomings in our Fourth Amendment law and our equal protection law. I advocate for drug courts and alternatives to incarceration, and for bail reform, because bail is, cash bail anyway, is just one of many ways in which we criminalize poverty in this country. Recently, especially since last August, I felt the need to engage more practically with my community. I come from a background where I was a staff attorney, a public defender at the Bronx Defenders, a holistic public defender organization in Bronx County, New York. We strive to meet all the needs of our clients, not just the criminal case, but if there was a housing case, if there was instance of police misconduct, if there were social service needs, we work together, we work collaboratively to meet the needs of our clients. And I've been hungering to get back towards affecting practical change in my community. I help co-direct the Law and Public Service program at the law school, which helps train law students who want to become public interest lawyers, and that's been very satisfying, but it's not quite enough. So I'm looking for opportunities to re-engage, and this is one of those opportunities. I'm also working to construct a bail reform statute as an alternative to money bail. So I would just love the opportunity to participate in providing oversight, transparency, and respectful treatment to the community vis-a-vis the police.
Hi, my name is Evan Brown. As you all have heard, there are some brilliant people up here on this stage, and I think you all should be lucky that we have such amazing people in the community with incredible expertise, so please use them, but also consider the fact that we have people with incredible experiences with police contact, and that in and of itself is also expertise. And that when we are considering staffing this board, writing the bylaws, we must center the concerns of people, the experiences of people who disproportionately experience police violence and police abuse. That includes Black people, Native people, queer people, undocumented people, people with insecure housing, people with disabilities, and of course, poor people. So please keep that in mind. I want to express my displeasure with the fact that we're having random questions drawn. I think that, again, these people should be asking the questions first. They're the ones who are experiencing these problems more often than white people. And not once have I heard that policing and the police here in Charlottesville is an institution of white supremacy. And this board must address this issue no matter what it is doing. So it must have teeth. It must center the experiences and concerns of these people. So please keep that in mind when you're choosing those to serve on this board. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your introductions. Appreciate it. We'd like to move on to questions now, and we've had a delivery of a box over here. Hermetically sealed. So if you don't look, just swing your hands around there and pull them out.
Just so you know what I'm seeing inside this box, there aren't very many questions. So here we go. But they're important ones. So this goes to Mr. Fogel first, as he will be the first to answer. This comes from one of our community members. How do you feel about the current police interactions with low-income communities? Mr. Fogel?
It's almost too easy to answer. I mean, that is the problem. That is the fundamental problem that we've had, not just in Charlottesville, but around the country as well. I mean, the truth is that if you look at it from a macro perspective, the police are here to enforce the current social order. And that's what they do. And so we can't simply look at the police. We have to be looking at the social order that creates the police as well. And we have to be working on both fronts in order to attack this problem. You can't just take it out on the police because they're actually doing their job. There are forces behind the police that we have to get at as well if we're going to really change this paradigm of relationship. And then secondly, we need to have the community more involved. For example, rather than hire so-called experts to design and to facilitate this meeting, why wasn't the community asked to design, run, and facilitate the meeting? If you want people from the community involved, you've got to get them involved. Don't just invite them to come and speak at them. Let them actually participate in the process. So, as I said, I think the answer to the question is easy. And of course, it cuts across race as well. Because whatever else people feel, there's no question, as a matter of fact, that Black people are disproportionately represented in low-income communities. And that's nowhere more true than in a place like Charlottesville, where we look at the number of Black people in Charlottesville, approximately 19%. We look at the rate of poverty in Charlottesville, almost the same. And the relationship between the two is very strong. And of course, it's not an accident. So we have to attack this on all those fronts, economic, political, and otherwise. And it's my hope that this board can also bring truth to that process and point out where the problem lies beyond the police.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you look at the the huge disparity gap between the wealthiest 1% and the remaining 99%, the 99% could also be considered low income. And the problem exists that the reality is that many of the interactions in the low income, as you want to, however you choose to define them, communities with the police, is that the first time that they ever see them is when there's a problem, when they have to be called. I don't know that we've ever actually experienced true community policing, but we've got to get the police out into the communities where the very first interaction is where they're out seen walking the communities, out seen interacting with the students, the children, the elderly of the community in a way that makes the residents feel safe and feel comfortable. We don't want the first time that you meet an officer to be when he's coming to put handcuffs on you, or coming to knock on your door to tell you that your child or someone has been arrested or been in an accident. We need to get to the point where the police are known. We need to get to the point where we can develop some level of trust, especially with those community police officers, and so that they get to know you by name, so that they don't have to actually issue arrest warrants, so that they can, if someone's been out drinking a little bit too much, they'll just put them in the car, get them home. It's not, there are so many things that don't require actual arrest. You can interact with people in a way that it's not a controversial or a bang-bang sort of, and I don't mean shooting when I say bang-bang, in a way so that it's not where someone's actually going to get arrested or end up in jail or end up with a problem behind it. If we can get back to community policing, if we can actually do some grassroots policing, we can solve some of the issues anyway. But we've got to be able to develop the level of trust. And right now, the low-income residents, those who are most needy in our community, don't have that in our police department.
Thank you.
Senor.
Okay, I will address that question with this phrase. It is called access to justice. It is not a secret that, of course, if you have low income, you will not have the best resources to get to hire a lawyer or to hire attorneys to get access to justice. Sometimes that same social circumstances that keep you in that stage or social state keep you away of the means to address the things that are affecting you. So that's one of the issues that this review board have to address, specifically recognizing that being a voice or trying to help this or create this mechanism to help that access to justice. For example, if we can work in the accountability, in the statistics of the police, in the interventions, in all that thing, we will be able to help in the access of justice that the low-income people or different communities are not having. So I guess that is our task, and we definitely have to work on that, making regulation with the city council, communication with the police, having statistics, follow up that things, trying to be that access to justice that otherwise it's difficult to have. I guess that's part of our work, and we have to work on that, definitely.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Well, I am a low-income resident, and the abuse that we get from the policing, of over-policing, we not only get over-policing from the city of Charlottesville, but we also get from where I live at, in particular, West Haven. We are over-policed also by UVA police. So we have two different jurisdictions of policing in low-income neighborhoods. Not only do they come in over-policing, but they come in with the mentality of we're less than people. We're less than anything that people feel that we could attain to be. We have to be hoodlums. We gotta be ghetto. We gotta be just black. You know, I've watched them come in there and call us all kinds of names. I watch how they come in there and they treat us like we're not, you know, like I say, we're less than. But the thing is, like I said, I've been doing this for years. I've been with public housing, and we've had conversations with police officers. The police officers wouldn't come to meetings with us. We've also tried to do community policing. The community policing did not work, and now they're sending these same officers back into the community. And then when they're coming to ask you questions, they're not asking you questions because they have already been in this neighborhood. So they already know what the situations and the problems are in the neighborhood. So they're continuing to come to try to put something on you instead of policing, instead of having transparency and a relationship. I've asked police officers, can we have cookouts? Could we do different things with the children, like the Slurpees, you know, different things. I'm from the metropolitan area, so the police were involved with our, you know, with the children and in the community. Here, we don't have that. And but they will come to our community and quick to ask for, what is it, Crime Watch? What are them things called? The people that, you know, that you want to come in, you know, that you want us to protect our community by, you know, snitching or working for Jade or something like that. But far as just being a community and coming into a black community, why can't we have less over policing?
I think both Mr. Fogel and Mr. Gathers have made some interesting comments on this subject. If the social order is what is driving the police protocols, if you will, then it seems to me that we're talking about needing to change the social order. And what that means to me anyway is looking past the colors of our skin, where we live, all of those things, and seeing each other as my sister and my brother, all around us, and taking that and beginning to mold it into the kind of community we want it to be. We're going to have to get used to giving up our power and sharing it with other people. That shouldn't be a new concept, but it does seem to be in need of happening, and I would like to see that happen with this group.
Well, I think that this issue, of course, I believe that we do need to change the social order. That's a big job. I don't know that that's going to be done in the near future. I think we need to start where we actually are right now. And I think the first thing we need to be clear about is what are the viewpoints of the various parties involved. There's a deep, deep distrust of the police force in, for example, the public housing communities. Why is that? It's because the police act like an army of occupation there. They act like they're in Afghanistan or somewhere dealing with hostile natives that they have to keep an eye on, or else they may do something to them. They don't trust the people in the neighborhood because the people in the neighborhood don't trust them. Why don't they? Because of the historic mistreatment of black people by the police. We're not going to get anywhere at all unless we attack that first. The attitude of the police and the behavior of the police toward minorities in our city has got to change before any of this other stuff really can change. And I don't know what it is going to take to do that, but that's what we've got to get to work on. We've got to find out how to root out bad racist attitudes, bad racist habits of behavior from the police force itself. If that means firing some people and getting some new ones in here, by God, let's get on with it.
I feel that when the police come into low-income neighborhoods, they take the job of the judge and the jury. As I said, you can call for help, but if they feel that you're not the one that needs help, they're going to arrest you when that is not their job to do. And when they go into a low-income neighborhood, they see hoods and thugs and everything. You know, they don't think that there's intelligent people in those low-income neighborhoods, but that's just where we ended up. That's just where we are able to afford to live. But just because we live in this neighborhood does not mean that we're thugs, and does not mean that we need to be treated in that manner. And when we call for help, that's what we should get, is help. And stop treating us like we're back in the olden days, where you were allowed to do this. Back in the olden days, you could just come to our house and snatch us out the house and didn't have a reason. And that's what it looks like now in Charlottesville, that the police are here doing whatever they want to do and however they want to do it. And the problem is the chief of police is not doing anything. He is upholding this code of honor that the police have. And that's what needs to stop, is this code of honor. I'm not against all police. I'm against the ones that are wrong. The ones that uphold their partners when they know their partner just did wrong. That's who I'm against. We need to overhaul the police department in order for our low-income communities to be safe, for our citizens to be safe.
I think this idea that there are two Americas, I think Charlottesville is one of the places where you can see that most clearly. I think police respond differently depending on where they're going to. And I think if certain communities only see the police come in and be over-aggressive and overuse force and ask questions later, there's not going to be any trust there. So I think we need to find ways to build trust between the communities most marginalized by the police. I think that includes what people have mentioned up here before in terms of having more participation in the community by the police, not just seeing them when they're coming in to arrest. I think that includes some demilitarization of the police. They can't come in with guns blazing and asking questions. Second.
Well, I would like to speak. I lived in low income for 11 years, and it's what everybody is saying about that is true. I see they do treat people in low income differently, and you can't judge people where they live, because I lived in low income and I worked every day and raised my children. So some people are really about something, and you can't judge people like that. And now with all this stuff worldwide, with all this murder and stuff, you don't want to feel like you have to be fear of the police. If I call the police, I don't want to be worried about if they're going to arrest me. That would be horrible, and I got to defend myself, and the first thing they're going to say, I resisted arrest, throw me down, break my legs, because I'm getting old now, so you can't throw me around like I used to, you could. So it's got to be something done. And why can't we get together and have different kind of events where the police come in and talk to the citizens? I mean, they don't have to come in with the guns, because, see, that's just intimidation. But, do some fun stuff with the community, and that would make a difference. Let us know that they are human, because we sure are.
I remember being at an event with my boss from the Bronx Defenders, pioneer in indigent defense, a woman by the name of Robin Steinberg, and she was asked about a broken criminal justice system, and her response was, the criminal justice system is not broken, it's doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to exercise social control over Black, brown, and poor civilians. And I think that's right. I'm hopeful that the problem is less about explicit bias on the part of police officers, though that's certainly a problem, but implicit bias and the problem of simply becoming, after a time, a cog in the system and failing to question what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so I think Mr. Gathers is right that one of the things that we need to do to get beyond that is community policing as a means towards officers seeing community members as community members, as co-members, people deserving of respect and equal treatment. We heard it said that police officers go into communities and act as judge and jury, and I think that's true. And the reason why they're able to do that is because of problems of overcriminalization, issues where police are not checked by law. And so what we need to do in the absence of law is we need to check them through political influence and oversight, and that's what I hope this board will do, is exercise some political oversight and pushback.
Yeah, so I totally support some of these opinions on what to do to address low-income interactions. But we can't forget also that, why are these people poor to begin with? Obviously, it's because of structural, systemic reasons why people are poor in this town. And inevitably, no matter how much you reform the police abuse will still likely fall on them. It's not falling on, wealthy white business owners in this town. We know this. If you're a homeless individual, you're going to get your head slammed into the ground and you'll possibly be killed. People have witnessed this. So to address these interactions, we need to also address the reasons why people are homeless in this town, why people have low incomes, by investing in affordable housing, making sure that they lifting these people up instead of giving back to these wealthy people, and potentially even divesting from the police department.
I'm not a person who is who lives in a low-income housing situation. I live near a very large building that is now towering over West Haven, and I am watching more development come to this community that is not addressing the living situations of people who cannot afford to live here any longer. I'm watching, from my professional perspective, I'm watching Black men get arrested because they fit the description of being a Black person walking down the street, when a Black person was the person who supposedly committed a crime. And then I'm watching him get numerous charges racked up against him so that he has to plead guilty to something. Then I'm watching him go to prison, and then I'm watching him serve some time, come out with a felony record, and be unable to get to live in public housing. I'm watching him unable to get a good job. I'm watching that system all day, every day, not as a member of that particular community, but as somebody working amongst that community. And I say, I want to hear from those people in this board, if I'm part of that board, what are these experiences that this community is having with the police? Where are the problems? What do we need to be hearing about? What is the police either not hearing or not understanding about what we're telling them? And how can we give that a process in order for people to be able to make their opinions heard, and then to be able to do something about that and to make positive change within the Black community, the homeless community, the people who are most suffering from disparate contact with police officers.
Thank you all. The next question: how will you enforce police accountability for their negligence in handling the missing persons case of Sage Smith? Can't read that word.
I speak a lot of languages, but that one, no.
Well, it says, will they, undecipherable, be able to get an apology for her family? So, Mr. Gathers.
First of all, the entire situation around and revolving Sage Smith is saddening and sickening. The truth of the matter is that seemingly the police in this area have moved very swiftly and very quickly to find white women who have turned up missing, but have not done the same for people of color, of the LGBTQ community. And it's truly disheartening, and I don't know how anyone cannot have their stomach turned because of this. The inaction on Sage Smith and other people of color that have come up missing in this community should really be a bellwether to everyone who lives here. It's as though the most marginalized people in this community are cared for and cared about, the very least, by the people who are sworn to protect them. And that has got to change. There has got to be some accountability. There's got to be some responsibility. And those who are hired, who are appointed, who are anointed to do a job have got to be held accountable to do that job. There's been so much inactivity, and we've heard so very little about any leads, anything in the disappearance of Sage Smith, that many in the community have not forgotten about her, but we've had so many other things that we've had to deal with. But the family still realizes it. We still realize it. And there's got to be something done. Somebody's got to be held accountable. We've had officers come and go, we've had chiefs come and go, and nothing has changed. And it's got to be a priority, and it's got to be imperative of the very next person that comes in here that's hired as chief, that's the very first thing that ends up on his or her desk. We've got to get that pushed and find out what happened with Sage Smith.
Can you repeat the question, please?
How will you enforce police accountability for their negligence in handling the missing persons case of Sage Smith? Will there be able to be an apology for her family?
Okay. I'm going to be honest. I ignore that specific case, so I cannot talk about that specific circumstances regarding that person, which I apologize in the specific sense. But talking in general terms, we can address the address and work in accountability of the person that are liable to that. In this review, in this board, we got to work precisely with that. We got to delineate some way of get a statistic, how the police are working, if they are following up that guidelines. And if they are not doing so, well, there are mechanisms to make that people responsible for the lack of work regarding their duties. And I guess we can work on that definitely. We can trace some regulation, way that they can give up information, how they're working with that, how they're following up the guidelines. And surely if they don't doing that, they will be responsible for not doing their work.
Thank you. I feel the accountability to the police. They were wrong from the beginning, because they had the evidence and they had the young man there, and for you to let that young man go and act like you didn't have no way of knowing how to reach back to this gentleman and all the different, the police had just as much information as the citizens had. The citizens did the police work. And as the citizens did the police work, the police stopped doing what they wasn't already doing in the beginning. So I feel that it should, like you say, we still need to go back into the police department and do an overhaul. Because where was the bias in the situation from the beginning of who did they put on as detectives, or who did they ever put in charge of the case from the beginning? We're gonna not only go back from Sage Smith, but we're gonna go all the way back to Quinn Wolfhawk, which has been missing for 20, I've been here 13, so he's been missing to 13, so therefore he was missing almost 7 before that. And this young man he's been missing majority of his life because he's only 20-something, like 30 years old. So, and then we have Miss Tinsley's murder. So, you know, where is the accountability in the police department, period? There is none. Because it depends on if you have money or not that dictates what job is being done in the police department. And it also deals with who's been being in charge of the police department from the head all the way down. So if you don't start with who's the head of the police officer, which have been there for years, so that stimulates what gets taken care of in Charlottesville, and especially a black person, we still go back to racism. If it's not about racism, you're not worth anything. If it's not white, you're not right.
I think for something like this, you have to start and understand and believe with your whole heart that all of us are created equal. In addition, I think you also have to apply the golden rule that you do unto others what you expect to have done to you. And if you can follow those two things, you have a much better chance of starting a process that will work and go to completion and bringing the right person to justice.
Well, we're talking a lot about transparency and accountability, and the reason that those concepts make sense is that the police are not an independent agency, a self-governing, self-regulating agency. The police, from top to bottom, are public employees. That's why transparency is important. The public needs to know what the policies are, who's working there, what they're doing, the records of the police themselves need to be accessible to the public so that the public can hold the police accountable for the things that are going wrong and badly. So I'm not saying that they need to publish everything that in the Daily Progress every day, but there needs to be an avenue of accessibility of information. The police have a tendency to want to keep their cards close to the chest. They don't want to talk about personnel matters. So, for example, when you talk about stop and frisk, who's doing all this stuff? Are there some officers that are doing a lot of it? We have no idea. They don't want to talk about personnel matters, and they don't want to talk about investigations that are underway. Well, we all remember Chief Longo weeping on public and calling for public support when they were looking on a certain case a few years ago. And we don't see that in this case, and the public needs to have a way to bring the police to the table to talk about this case, to find out why it hasn't gone any further, and what other real options there might be to pursue it further. Otherwise, it rankles rightly as something that's been swept under the carpet.
I really couldn't hold the new chief of police accountable because they haven't even came to Charlottesville yet, and we don't know who they are yet. But I do hold the police department accountable for Sage Smith, because when Hannah Graham went missing for a month and a half straight, every single day they searched for Hannah Graham until they found her. So why do the people of color don't get the same treatment as the white people? I mean, I'm not prejudiced in no way whatsoever. As y'all see, I'm light-skinned. I got a lot of white in me too. So I'm not prejudiced in no way. I just feel that Charlottesville, the police department is very prejudiced. There is a lot of people in that department that needs to come out of that department. Anytime they look in your face and tell you they're not here for you, they're not here to protect you, then who are they here for? Like on August the 12th, somebody gave my son the death threat in front of the police, and they told me it was nothing they could do about it. So when are the police going to be held accountable? I think they need to, for a month and a half, 2 or 3 months straight, they need to get the resources up and start looking for Sage Smith again, and also for Furbia Tinsley's murderer.
So I think the accountability part of this starts with transparency and details. I think we need to know exactly what the police have done and what they haven't done. But I think we need to be specific about it. I think we need to know how many hours have people worked on this case, who's worked on it, what leads have been followed up and what hasn't. And this can't be us sitting here listening to the police tell us. This needs to be independently acquired, investigated information. And then in terms of moving forward for accountability, I think commitments need to be made. How many resources will be going into this investigation going forward? And there needs to be a regular review process where we hold the police accountable. Are they living up to their commitment? Are they doing what they say they're going to do?
Well, I knew Sage when he was a little baby. I knew the whole family. And you know, so he was well known in this community. And to go missing and they didn't find the person when they had the person. Now, I like cold cases. And I watch those shows, and so I don't know a lot about the police force, but I'm sure if you can't tell me they couldn't find that man from New York or wherever he was from. I mean, I just can't believe that with my whole heart. Somebody knew, and they let this person slip away. And then they didn't, I don't know if they even picked up again. They didn't tell us anything. Like you said, they don't get reports. So we don't know what they have done since. And this has been too long. And then, you know, it's just scary that people can just disappear off the face of the earth or get killed and can't find no clues. So it still goes back to what we always know is who you are, your color. Race does make a difference. I mean, I don't live in this world long enough to know that. So this has to change. Everybody needs to be treated equally because we all are human. And we're all going to die someday, people. So, hey, I don't know what's all of that, you know, mine's yours, color. I don't know what that's all about because this is 2018. Things got to change. I have 2 great-grandbabies now. I don't want to see my grandchildren or my great-grandkids come up the way I did because I came through a lot of racism.
So I think the lack of attention, the lack of police attention in the Sage Smith case points to a systemic problem, and it's a different kind of systemic problem. It's a good question because it points at a different kind of systemic problem than we often talk about in these forums. In a forum like this, you often talk about over-policing, so stop and frisk, a disproportionate use of stop and frisk, the racialized use of stop and frisk, broken windows enforcement of the kind that leads to people like Eric Garner, this is over-policing, being put in a chokehold for selling some loose cigarettes or allegedly selling some loose cigarettes. But what this question points out is under-policing, which is also a systemic problem. Under-policing is what leads George Zimmerman to not be arrested immediately for killing Trayvon Martin. Under-policing is what leads crimes, violent crimes in poor and marginalized communities to go ignored and to go disregarded. So I think we just have to get past, and it's a difficult problem, and I'm not quite sure how we do it, but we need to work hard to have different lives be worth the same. It can't be the case that you know, a wallet in your hand gets you shot in one community, but you know, maybe this is the difference between Canadian and American police, but someone points a gun at police officers in Toronto after killing people and he's taken into custody peacefully. I'm glad he was taken into custody peacefully yesterday, but we see too little of that when it comes to crime in Black and brown communities.
Yeah, so I echoed the calls for accountability, and I think specifically with the Sage Smith case, the CRB, whoever composes it, should have and should encourage, they should have the power to hire either an outside investigator, an outside agency who's independent of the Charlottesville Police Department, to not only investigate this case, but also to see and analyze where the Charlottesville Police Department went wrong, what they didn't do, what they should have done. Compare this case to other missing cases of people either who were white and see what those differences were, and people who were not transgender, because we can't also forget that Sage Smith was, you know, a transgender woman, and that also intersects with her racial identity. So I think making sure that we have the resources to be able to do that going forward is incredibly important.
Yeah, we're talking about a person here who's been missing for years, and we're talking about it as sort of a matter of policy, but it's worth remembering that this is a young woman who has been missing, I can't think of it off of the top of my head how many years she's missing. I'm sure it's almost 6 years, almost 5.5 years. one of the things that I do for a living is look into police investigations in cases. I know how to do that. I pride myself in, I think, doing that well. That's something that the Community Review Board is really going to have to consider in terms of where. Obviously, we know that people can file complaints with the police department. If this is an issue that the community needs to know more about and demands to know more about, which it is, from the Civilian Review Board, this would be 7 people's job to take that information and use that information when writing the bylaws and when determining what the Civilian Review Board will be able to do with what the community is asking. Because right now there aren't very many methods that the community can engage with the police department. We can file Freedom of Information Act requests. Most of those will get denied for a variety of reasons. It's an ongoing investigation, so the community does not have access to any of that investigative material. So it's an important thing to consider. What do we want this Community Review Board to do? And I think hearing questions like this, it's important to remember this board's job is to listen to the public and to say, what do you need and how can we figure out a way to get the things that you need from the community to the police department in terms of, the understanding how we can affect their policies or potentially looking into investigating it. I believe what a lot of people have said here about having independent power, ideally subpoena power would be great. We need to protect the lives of the Black and brown men and women, transgender women in our community, and Sage Smith is one of those people, most definitely.
The only thing I'd like to add is people have to realize there's responsibility in the city manager. The police department reports to the city manager. The city manager under the charter is specifically titled to be the public safety director. Not just the city manager, but the public safety director. And unfortunately, he has not exercised any supervisory power over the police department. Often he professes not to know what's going on, nor does he take the opportunity to find out what's going on and share that with the community. So the responsibility here has to be broadened out among all of the players who have responsibility here. And otherwise, I agree with most everything people have said about what happened with Sage.
Thank you.
And for your next question. Senor Gonzalez, you'll be answering first. Do you think there is a racial bias in stop and frisk policies? If so, how would you respond to it on the CRB? And if not, what should be done about the disproportionate number of Black civilians stopped and frisked?
I'm absolutely sure that there is a different treatment about regarding Black people and other communities also in the police intervention with them. The other part of the question, how can we work with that?
If not, what should be done about the disproportionate number of Black civilians stopped and frisked? So first, do you see any biases? If so, how would you respond to it? And then if not, what should be done about the disproportionate number of Black civilians stopped and frisked?
Again, it comes with the accountability issue. We need to get that information in order to be able to work with them. They have to give us. We have to manage the way to force them to give more report of what they're doing. And then once we have that, we can be able to work with the numbers, with the statistics, of course. Yes.
Gracias.
Yeah, there is a disproportion of stop and frisk. One, I sit on the DMC task force, and we've been asking for FOIAs and sending numerous different paperwork to the court for the proper information for the stop and frisk report. And the numbers were completely wrong. Then we just recently got a report again on stop and frisk, and it's still wrong, as the police always continues to write the wrong report, but they don't tell you in a manner of what they're stopping you for, or they weren't even arrested. They were being stopped, and majority was narcotics. So if there was a narcotic stop, that means it was in a black neighborhood continuously, where you're continuously to see bias in color. Because, I mean, you don't see really no whole lot of white people being stopped on stop and frisk. And if they are stopped and frisked, most of them are either homeless or they're even getting stopped for drunk in public, and that's downtown. But when you continuously have these officers, like I said before, that have been on the beat for so long, that have been in these communities, they know which community to continuously to go back and to continue to harass the citizens, so that there will be a stop and frisk. So there will be another set of numbers, but also even in the stop and frisk, how many times are you stopping these particular black people or people in general, that if people feel that there is not disproportion, how many people do y'all feel they're stopping these people in, how many times? Like far as drunk in public, how many times are particularly stopping these people and locking them up, or you're not locking them up? You know, so we don't have a specific good question or report of what is a specific stop and frisk, but I know it's over stopped and frisk. And like I say, some of these officers need to be pulled off beat so they can stop stopping and frisking.
Thank you.
Certainly the statistics on the stop and frisk are pretty frightening. They're appalling to see the number of those cases and the fact that so many of them are predominantly for black people. To me, the Citizen Review Board should be developing the structure to set standards for when it is appropriate to stop and frisk, or if it's appropriate at all. I think that's the task that the board will have to be taking on, and if you approach it from the premise that the police should be treating each and every one of us the same way, that we are all entitled to the same protection, then I think that we would have to come up with some standards that made some pretty strong statements about when certain kinds of behavior are tolerable in the community in the name of policing and when they're not.
Thank you.
Well, I think the numbers speak for themselves. The recent figures I saw were that 71% of stop and frisk were black people. Usually these are young men and teenage boys. Well, you take 100 people, and 71 of them are drawn from a population of 8,500. 29 are drawn from a population of 35,000. Do the arithmetic, it's 10 to 1. Now, this is no accident, we all know that. What we need to do is to get the police, you know, they keep incident reports for every one of these. What criteria are they using, are they stating on their report for stopping somebody? What was the subsequent, what showed up in the frisk, and did it warrant the stop? We need to see this data much more plainly than we do, and we need to be able to identify who is doing these stop and frisks so that we can see whether there are a few officers that are doing a lot in this neighborhood and none in that, and so on. But let's back off a minute. I've heard people say, oh yes, they stop a lot more black people because they commit more crimes. Now I want to ask anybody here, do you think that there are more drugs used and bought and sold in West Haven and Friendship Court than on Rugby Road, or in the dormitories, or out in Walker Precinct, or out in Woolen Mills? Heck, let me say heck, no. And if the police were pursuing people on the street in those neighborhoods the way they do in West Haven, we'd see some different numbers, I'll bet you 50 cents. And we'd see different population in the jail. Except the people they arrest on Rugby Road would be out in the next morning after they were arrested. So there's a lot that has to go into investigating this question of stop and frisk. It is a nasty business. It's a clearly racist, biased business, and it needs to be put right in the middle of what this review board is looking at, taken apart. We need to get to the bottom of it to see why it keeps going on the way it has, who's responsible, and what steps can be actually taken to put this on a right track or no track.
Yeah, we all know there's a racial bias in our community. The stop and frisk, one day my son was at the store, he has a concealed weapon permit, and he was at the store and he reached his hand up to pay for his item and 3 police officers rushed him. He continued and continued to tell him that he had a concealed weapons permit, but they kept their hands on him for 5 minutes. Wouldn't even let him reach to get his wallet to show proof that he had a concealed weapons permit. I mean, too many people standing on the street and the police just stops by, what are you doing? You know, you can't even stand on the street around here anymore. And this stop and frisk is just taking away all of our rights. It's like it's taking away our rights because, like I said before, it's like going back in the olden days when they didn't even have to have permission to do whatever they did to us back then. And that's what it feels like it's getting back to right now, you know? It really feels like we're seeing nooses hanging. They said they weren't nooses on the downtown mall. You know, we got the KKK coming. We got the police facing us like we're the criminals instead of facing the ones who came here to harm us. So this stop and frisk, I mean, I don't know what we can really do about it other than, as I said, overhaul the police department and get the ones out there that are doing this. I mean, that's the only thing I can say to do. And it's a whole lot of them. I got a lot of names too that I can name for y'all too, you know, and we need to get them out the police station. Can I say Pleasance? Can I say Hickey? Who can I say? I can say some of them.
So there's obviously a bias with stop and frisk. I think you can look at the numbers. I think that enough would tell you. But beyond the numbers, hearing stories of the interactions the police have in terms of stopping and frisk, there's clearly a bias. I think around the country it's been shown that stop and frisk does nothing to deter crime and does a lot to have the mistrust between the police and the community department. So I think this is, I think we need to get rid of stop and frisk right now.
Well, let me give my little speech about this stop and frisk. Yes, it's disproportionate. And I feel sometimes people are targeted. Maybe somebody said, you know, talk back to the police department and they can say, well, I'm going to get you, you know, they'll be looking for it if they know what kind of car they have. And sometimes too, with the little tent, some people have a little tent on their car. And I don't know, I think they think people are trying to conceal something, so they'll stop people because they have tent on their car. And if you kind of talk back, then they might bring the dog and sniff the car. I mean, I've seen this happen, so I'm not just quoting something that I think. So that has to stop too, because it's got to, and if I get on this board and like somebody else down here said, we need to really know the criteria. We need to know what leads them to stop people. We need to know that. I mean, certain areas, you know, in Charlottesville, that's not right, because we know drugs is everywhere. But yeah, we need to know exactly what that criteria is to stop all these people that's been stopped.
Look, I've never been stopped and frisked, and that's not an accident. It's not because I've lived a law-abiding life my entire life. It's not because I've never broken a law. I don't see that as an accident at all. And maybe one of something that's especially bad about stop and frisk is it's not even necessary, right? It's just a tool of degradation and humiliation that police forces can do just fine without. In New York City, they dropped from hundreds of thousands of stop and frisks to 10% of what they were doing before, based on changes in policy and litigation, and crime rates still drop. The city is no worse off. It's a lot better off, and community relations with police have actually benefited from police just laying off of stop and frisk. But part of what enabled New York City to take positive action around biased use of stop and frisk is the fact that they had data in the first instance. So a number of people brought this up already, but we need to know how often this is going on. That's where transparency comes in. That's one of the things that a civilian review board will help with. But it's a multifaceted attack, right? It's lawyers litigating. It's media bringing attention not just to the numbers, but to the individual cases, the stories behind the stops and the frisks. Because when you hear those stories, it can sometimes be more powerful than even the most troubling figures. So, I mean, other than that, I agree with everything I've heard so far. But I just think this is one piece. The accountability that we'll bring to things is one piece of reform of stop and frisk, but there's a lot more that needs to be done.
Okay, I'll try to be brief. Stop and frisk is racist. In stop and frisk, we know that stop and frisk stops are mainly due to smell of weed. We need to decriminalize weed and some other possession of drugs. And the CRB should be able to review these types of policies independently and report directly to council and make recommendations of how we can modify these policies or eliminate them.
If we decriminalize weed, can we also bring all of the black men out of prison who are serving time for having for marijuana-related crimes? I was pulled over not that long ago. Oh, stop and frisk is racist. We can end it. Answering that question. I was pulled over not that long ago and had a very positive encounter with the police officer. And I left thinking, this is my white privilege on full display. I had my children's car seats in the back of my car. I look the way that I look driving a Honda CRV. You know, a man walked up to me, the officer walked up to me, he introduced himself to me by name. He gave me a later court date than he normally would have, so that it allowed me to get my registration in order so that I did not have to end up paying any fines or getting any tickets. And my first feeling was, whew, got out of that pretty easy. And my second feeling was, what the, heck is going on where this is the experience that I have, and somebody who lives next door to me has a very, very different experience because of the color of their skin. We are very grateful for people like Jeff Fogel to get us some stop and frisk statistics, but part of the problem with the statistics is that they're only as good as the data collection. So if you're only collecting certain pieces of information, or you are omitting pieces of information, then you do not get a full picture. So my feeling is what a CRB could do about stop and frisk is review the policies, determine where racial bias exists, and we know that it does, look into what policies, whether it's effective at all. I believe we'd come to the same conclusions that New York did, which is that it is not effective. Determine how it would make police safer as well as community members safer to not stop and frisk, and that it is a non-valuable tool within this community. And my timer, so I'm going to stop.
When I was in law school 50 years ago, I was waiting for the laughs. It's true. I was in law school 50 years ago. President Lyndon Johnson appointed a commission to look at policing. And they came out with a report exactly 50 years ago. And one of the things they pointed out in the report was how stop and frisk practices in urban areas exacerbated relationships, not just between the police and the community, but between the community and the entire leadership and politics of that particular place. What did the police department do armed with that information? Absolutely nothing, except perhaps in the case of New York, where they decided they were going to enhance it, because somehow the police commissioner believed that he could keep guns off the street and he didn't give a damn about the Constitution. Now, I have been struggling with this issue now for 5 years here, ever since we had the first report came from Chief Longo. Chief Longo claims that it was his idea to keep those statistics. Not true. I was one of the people in the community, along with the NAACP, who met with him and urged him, insisted that he start keeping those statistics. But what happened thereafter when those statistics proved just what we were concerned about? Nothing. And we have some members of the city council sitting here who refuse to do anything. And we have a police department that refused to do anything. I represented, and in fact, one of the first things that I would do is take a look at the narratives that police officers are required to write each time they stop somebody. I asked for those. I was denied them. I represented the NAACP and the Public Housing Association of Residents and sued the city in order to get that. And we agreed at that time, take out all identifying information. I don't want to know the name of the cop. I don't want to name the name of the person who was stopped. I don't want to name the name of any of the witnesses. We just want to look at the decision-making process of the police officers who are stopping people. Answer, no, you can't have it. Why not? I met with the city manager. Maurice, why can't we have this with all of that left out? What are you protecting? Oh, you can't have it for the reason that our lawyers said in court. What did their lawyers say in court? We don't have to give it to you under the Freedom of Information Act. That's true because of a broad loophole in the act with regard to the police, but the fact that you don't have to give it doesn't mean that you can't give it. And I have never gotten an answer to that question. And so I have assumed all along that the problem is that the police department regularly engages in illegal stops and frisks. I don't think of any other inference that can be drawn from that series of communications that I have had. My big concern here is that they're not going to give it up. My big concern here is that the city council won't back up the Civilian Review Board when it makes a recommendation like that. Why don't we move to probable cause? Is there anything magic about reasonable suspicion made up out of whole cloth by the Supreme Court? Where does reasonable suspicion appear in the Constitution? Nowhere. The only word that's used in the Fourth Amendment is probable cause.
Thank you, Mr.
That
Fogel.
should be the standard.
If I remember the question, is stop and frisk racially biased?
Do you think there is racial bias in stop and frisk policies?
Yes.
If so, how would you respond to it on the CRB? And if not, what should be done about the disproportionate number of black civilians stopped and frisked?
Got it.
Yes, sir.
And again, the answer to the first half of the question is simply yes. It's a very race-based, racist, failed policy where they get minimalistic returns on the incivility that they cause to the community. 2 years ago, it bared out that it was 80% of people of color who were being stopped and frisked. This year, depending on when you saw the numbers, when you actually got the numbers, when they gave up the numbers, it was 73%, now 71%, and it's a failed policy. And if the city manager, whoever the city manager is, if he truly is the public safety officer, then we need to bring to bear pressure on him to make sure that the police chief and the police department ends the policy. That's the simplest way that we can do this. And while we're doing that, if we're going to end stop and frisk, we also need to look at Jade, because that's where a lot of the foolishness comes from. And if we can eliminate stop and frisk, and if we can put a distinct end to the Jade practices in their agenda, then we can take a look at some numbers and find out exactly where we are as a community, what we need to do as a community, how we can better police a community, if indeed the community needs policing.
Do you favor the CRB also tasking itself with publicly recognizing positive behavior by the police or only scolding them for negative behavior?
I couldn't hear you.
Do you favor the CRB also tasking itself with publicly recognizing positive behavior by the police or only scolding them for negative behavior?
Well, as who said before, they're not.
Could you hold your mic up, please? That's
Oh,
hard
I'm
to,
sorry.
thank you.
They're not all police are bad. So, I mean, we can give just due when it is due. But like they say, it takes respect to get respect. But if you don't give that respect, then the good officer, if you're not doing the things that you're supposed to do to get the respect to be that good officer, you're going to be in the category with the rest. But yes, as a CRB board and as a citizen in the community, we will recognize a police presence or police actions or whatever they may do. If it's good, yeah, we'll speak about it. But it's not all about just reprimanding the wrong. It's the point of going into the police department, period, and taking these officers, making them responsible for what their sworn duty is. And as a taxpayer paying their bills, because I'm paying their paycheck, I expect them to protect me, what they were sworn to do. So, yeah.
I agree with Rosia, that it would be important to build on what you have that's positive while you work on remediating the negative. I think if you're going to try to build a community of trust, which I think is the operative phrase in the whole CRB announcement and resolution, I think you have to find what's good and develop it, as well as eradicate the wrong.
Well, I have to say that there's a word in that question that really bothers me, and that is scolding the police for what they do wrong. We're not talking about scolding anybody here. We're talking about holding people accountable for serious injustice. Now, let's suppose that somewhere up the road, with a new police chief and an effective review board, we get some positive things going on between, say, the police force and the public housing communities. By God, the review board should encourage and applaud those good things. But I don't see that it's up to us to applaud the police for directing traffic well for the UVA football games. That's their job, come on. And we got to focus on what needs fixing here and encourage the fixing of it. That's how I would respond to that question.
The main reason for the CRB board, for the CRB, is to hold the police accountable for what they have been doing. I mean, we want to check on these complaints and make sure that the complaints were dealt with properly. I mean, this isn't something that the police are out here giving candy to kids or handing out money to anybody. This is not what we're investigating. The CRB board is investigating the wrongdoings of the police. I mean, so what kind of praise could we give the police for the wrongdoing that they're, I mean, I'm sorry, that question just confused me a little bit, because we're going against the police for what they're doing to our citizens in this community. So why are we going to praise them for what the abuse that they're doing to the citizens? I mean, that's just a confusing question to me. I'm sorry. But no, they need to be held accountable for what they're doing, not praised.
Yeah, this isn't, I don't think the review board is about positive behavior or scolding anybody. I think we're here to hold the police accountable, to make sure they're doing the job that they're here to do. I think it's to investigate the systemic racism that seems pretty prevalent within our police department, and to work on the relationship between the community and the police. We're not here to give out gold stars, and we're not here to put anybody in timeout. I think this goes a lot deeper and is a lot more serious than that.
Well, this board, to my knowledge, is to hold the police force accountable. But I feel that if somebody does something very human, they should be recognized as well. And maybe we could create a record, you know, like a monthly record of what they made, you know, amongst ourselves and the city council of what they did well and what went wrong, what they didn't do well. Keep records so that we could keep up with this stuff. Because, you know, you hear a lot of hearsay, and you can't always believe on either side if it's the truth. Because, see, I don't know the police like I used to. When my kids were coming up, I did. But I don't have much, you know, to do with the police force, no more than what I hear. And I know there's some good and some bad. I know that for a fact. But, you know, we need to really keep a record. And this is going to be getting the police involved with us. We got to have, I think, monthly meetings maybe, or every 2 or 3 months. We got to find out what's going on with them, because we got to be transparent about all of this. So this is how I see it should be handled. It should be anyway.
Do I think the police should be praised for doing exceptional work? Yes, but not by us. I don't think that that's what this board is about. This board is about holding police accountable and making sure that they do their jobs, and you don't get praised for doing your job. Now, I do think there should be institutions out there to support the police, but they already exist. I'll come clean. About 5 years ago, for a minute, I was on the Charlottesville Police Foundation because I thought that by joining the Charlottesville Police Foundation board, I would be able to affect change by promoting community justice and community policing initiatives. And there was some of that, but it was also a lot of praising and patting the back of the police department and supporting the police department. And I was happy that there were people doing that, but it wasn't my team. I wanted to work on behalf of the people who were subjects of state coercion, not the people who were agents of state coercion. And so even though I'm glad that there are people doing that, and I think the police should be praised when they do an exceptional job, and I think they should strive to do an exceptional job, it's just simply not what a civilian review board is.
Absolutely. What a ridiculous question. No, it is. It's absolutely ridiculous. We already have something that praises the police on a regular basis. It's called the United States of America. Did you forget what country we're living in? Veneration of the police is up there with Jesus, okay? You look at the news, there's always a good story about how an officer did something amazing. And you know what? Maybe they do good things sometimes. You know, but that is not the CRB's job. It is our job to hold them accountable.
I agree with that. I think about when who I want praise from and who I sort of deserve to get praise from. I think I would like my boss when I do well to give me praise. I'd like to be promoted when I do well in my work. But if somebody is holding me accountable for a system that is way bigger than any individual police officer, to try to hold me accountable to that, I don't expect that person to be the same person who's also patting me on the back. I believe that there are police officers who do good work. I believe that there are police officers who do bad work. I think this is an issue of systemic operational policing, and our job would be to be the civilian side that is the bridge between the civilians to say, these are the issues that the community is having, and this is how we need to address those issues. So does that involve patting on the back? I don't believe so. I also wouldn't see any sort of scolding. I would see a very, very firm approach to what the community thinks is problematic about the police department.
Josh, I'm glad you brought up the Police Foundation because it's a good example of precisely what happens in our society. They not only privately raise money for the police department, but they have honor awards and so on. What always struck me is that we don't have a similar society for maintenance workers or utility workers, all of whom have dangerous jobs. I just spoke to somebody today who was a maintenance worker who got run over by a car as he was being a flagman. Now, these are very dangerous jobs. These are people that are critical to the community, but nobody praises them. There's no foundation to raise money for them. In fact, this gentleman ends up on workers' compensation, which is at a salary level few people can afford to live on. So that's how much we praise some of our other workers. Now, in terms of the police and their desire to be appreciated, if you act right, if you act respectfully to people, you'll know that you're appreciated.
In my opinion, this board should be about accountability, responsibility, and transparency. As Evan said, police across this country already get the warm fuzzies, the attaboys, the pat on the backs every time that a jury or a judge decides to let one of them go when they've done something wrong. So that's not what this board is about or should be about. We need to be, and I don't think it's scolding, it is about holding people accountable and responsible for their actions or their inactions, because we still have those optics of August 12th, and we still have to deal with the inactions of that day. And unless and until we actually decide that we're going to put some teeth into this board and decide that, yeah, we can reprimand, yeah, we can recommend punishments, then, I mean, I don't know exactly what we're here for. But we have got to hold people accountable, hold their feet to the fire, and no, I don't think that we're supposed to be going out giving pats on the back.
Okay, if I have to answer that question with a simple yes or no, I will answer that no, based on the same premises that all my partners here. Of course, that is not the task and the responsibility of this review board, so that is easy. It's not, we don't have to praise, we have to assess and work in other issues. But I will qualify the question and I will seek if I can find something practical that can serve us. I won't use the word praise, I won't use that. I will use another concept like maybe an example. Maybe, I don't know, if we can find that in some instance, for example, the police department just did something that can be repeated because it is worth, well, we can use it as an example in any recommendation that we do, but an example, not anything related to praise or that, just in a practical way.
And this will be our last question. Time check.
We have more time, for probably 2 more,
Okay.
maybe 3. The group has dropped to about a minute each now, so it's moving right along.
Yeah. Well, let's move our minutes. So this will be going to you, Helen. What do you think the CPD, Charlottesville Police Department, should be doing, and what can the CRB do to protect undocumented Charlottesville community members from racial profiling and other forms of police abuse?
That's kind of a loaded question. I think that the focus of the police needs to be on maintaining order in alignment with the expectations of the community. And to me, that means that if there is no probable cause to pursue investigating some individual or stopping them and frisking them or any of the other things that we've heard about this evening, then the police probably don't have any need to do any of that. I would like everyone in this community to be treated equally and fairly, and I think that's the concept we need to make sure that every police member understands and follows in every single thing they say and do.
Boy, I think you said that very well, Helen. I think the key phrase there is probable cause. That just because you look suspicious to somebody who may have a bad stereotypical attitude toward you anyway, is not reason for him to stop you. And they say frisk. Frisk means push you around, ask you a lot of bullying questions, leave you hanging, wondering what the next second is going to bring. They need to behave respectfully in accordance with the law, in accordance with the constitutional principle that everyone is entitled to equal protection under the law, regardless of race, national origin, etc. And so, respectful, investigation-oriented police work would take the sting out of this question altogether, I think.
I think the police need a lot of training in many, many different ways. I mean, literally every way they can be trained for mental illness, for dealing with the black and brown people, for dealing with the LGBT. I mean, the police, I don't know, they just look at their job as if they're the judge and the jury. Like I said, they decide. They don't let the judge and the lawyers and everything fight. They do it out there on the street. And I don't know, the only thing that's gonna stop this is if they get disciplined by the police department. When they do these stop and frisk and they were unwarranted, I think they need to be held accountable in some way, pay taken away from them. They need to lose a day's work or something. I mean, but to continue to stop and frisk and we know that it's wrong, I mean, they have to be held accountable in some way. If they know they're doing wrong, how are they going to be punished? How do we punish them for doing wrong when they know they're doing wrong?
I think this comes down to accountability on a couple different levels. I think first, systematically, are there policies and procedures that encourage or reward officers for pursuing undocumented workers? Is there a culture that pats each other on the back when they pursue undocumented workers? And individually, we need to hold officers accountable. Are there specific officers who are seen to violate the rights of undocumented workers more than others? Maybe it's a few, and we need to find, they need to be held accountable. There needs to be punishments, there needs to be training involved. And the other aspect of this is we need to be able to listen to the community, the undocumented community, and they need to have a safe place where they can come report these abuses by the police. And I think it's the review board's job to be able to listen to them and then act on those.
Well, I've listened to everybody, what they said, and it makes sense. For one thing, we need to know the policies. That's one thing we have to get in our hands when once this board is formed. We need to know how do they go about, just intimidating these people or stopping them. I mean, until we know the policies and their criteria, how they go about it, and they got to be held accountable. Now, I don't know, they say the city manager is over the police department, and then if that's the case, when we find out that these policemen are doing wrong, they got to be recommended. They got to, they have to pay a price for this. Because somehow they don't thought they had, they've been doing this so long, I think they think that this is what is supposed to be happening. And I'd like to know how they are actually trained. I'd like to have some kind of handbook, how they train these police officers this day and time. Because there's a whole lot that came up on August 12th. I'm sure these young guys has never encountered. And I don't even think they was taught, because, they didn't do anything that day. So we want to know how they are trained and who they answer to. Which a lot of stuff we got to do, too. We have to have something in order.
For a very long time, conservatives have talked about states' rights. And, turns out they had a point, at least in some context, that local communities should be able to push back against the federal government in some cases. And enforcement of, or assisting in the enforcement of, immigration policy is exactly one of those cases. So when you ask what the police should do vis-a-vis undocumented immigrants, they should not cooperate with ICE at all, and they don't need to. They absolutely do not have to. And what's great is, you can use all this doctrine, all this constitutional doctrine that conservatives have pushed for to say that local communities can be responsive to their local constituents, and police need to be responsive to us as their local constituents. And this community would demand that policies being affected and being enacted by the federal government are not going to be enforced by local officials. If feds want to come in, well, we can resist them in other ways, but that's not for the Civilian Review Board. But what we can do is we can make sure that our local police are responsive to local will. And I think that the local will be to not participate in the removal of undocumented immigrants from our community. Our community members, we don't want to see them kicked out of our communities.
No, absolutely, I second that.
I kind of just want to third that. I want to say that this is another way to police through fear. And when you are afraid that your entire family and livelihood will be separated by police contact, you don't report, say, something like sexual abuse that might have occurred because you are afraid that your entire life and the lives of your whole family will be ruined. You are made to feel like you're not a part of this community. You are made to feel like you are only targeted and not somebody who is protected and served by your police department. You're also likely paying taxes that pay these salaries, by the way. I feel glad to have undocumented people in our community. I know many of them who I love very dearly, and I would hate to see something terrible happen to them, and I know it does happen to them. I'm glad that this issue was raised. It makes me think one of the big issues of the Civilian Review Board not only has to be outreach within the Black community, doesn't make me think this, I feel this way, but also within communities that we know a lot of undocumented immigrants live in. It makes me want to have Spanish speakers, and I'm glad that there are a couple of Spanish-speaking people who are applying to be on this board. I think there's a lot to be done in this particular area. I'm glad the question was asked.
Several things. I understand the police officers have been told in Charlottesville not to ask for people's citizenship status. That's what I understand. And if it's true, obviously that's important and that's correct. In terms of what impact police are having on immigrant communities, I don't think we know the answer to that because we don't have the statistics. Let me just mention also that every police officer now is wearing a body cam. But you know what? There's no policy in the police department governing the use of body cams. I FOIA'd it and found out there is none. So those are the kinds of information that's going to be critical in looking at how stop and frisk is conducted and how officers relate to citizens on the street. But you also have to know that the real problem has been the jail, that the jail has been willing to notify ICE about people being released. Now, the two representatives from Charlottesville voted against that. But that jail is a regional jail that encompasses Albemarle, Greene, sometimes parts of Madison, I'm not sure where else, Nelson. And so we were outvoted. Now, we shouldn't leave it at that. The fact that we were outvoted when a predominant number of the people in that jail are from here should not end the process. We should be putting pressure, including pressure that says, listen, if you want to run a jail the way you want to run a jail, that's not the way we want to run a jail, damn it, we'll run our own jail. And we've got to put that kind of pressure on them if we're going to protect immigrant communities here. It's got to be on the jail, and we've got to be able to take on some of these other entities that participate in governing the jail.
Personally, I don't think that we should be embracing any of the policies that filter down from the dumpster fire that's happening in D.C. right now. The immigrant community, both documented and undocumented, live here with us, work here with us, walk these same streets with us every day, and we need to embrace them in every possible way that we can. We had Nazis descend on our streets, and not one of them was stopped and frisked. So why are we treating our immigrant community any differently? We have people openly carrying and walking into our city council meetings, and they're not stopped and frisked. But people who are working here every day and paying taxes to this community, we want to treat them and marginalize them and behave in different ways towards them, and it's not proper. So unless and until we decide that we're going to embrace everyone in this community and truly be a loving community and truly be the capital of the resistance, we've got to decide what it is that we want to resist. As Jeff said, we don't need to be doing anything to help the Albemarle Regional Jail whatsoever when it comes time to release an immigrant. They don't need to be notified. ICE does not need to be notified. We don't need to notify anyone who is going to be detrimental or harmful to these people. Let them come back into our society. Let them reinvent themselves and give them a chance.
Well, certainly we have a big issue here. Of course, like any other minority group community in Charlottesville, Black community, LGBT, and etc. I guess the immigrants and undocumented community is one of the most vulnerable people. It's very difficult to get statistics, to get numbers, to know what's going on, because some of the communities you cannot get into it because people are afraid to talk about themselves. If they are undocumented, they are afraid that they can be just put out. So it is an issue how we are going to address that. Some of the things that we have been talking about, I wasn't even sure if we should be talking about, because certainly I'm afraid that in order to say how we are not supposed to deliver or work in something, or how should we do it, we are just raising the idea. And I'm glad that Charlottesville City have these certain policies regarding the federal government and what they're doing, whether they're stop or not stop. But regarding that, I guess that one of the issues that we at the Civilian Review Board have to assess is not legal, because legal we can go to the court and sue, and at the end, no police is gonna be regarding accountable. But the police department in Charlottesville is an agency, so we got to work in some regulations and see how they are, for example, if you have these police officers that have a background that a lot of percentage of their work has been focused on different groups like Black people and undocumented, well, certainly it has to be removed to another area. That is a work. Checking background, he have domestic violence, he have to be taking out the guns. You know, there are practical ways to work with that issue. Of course, the constitutional issues are there present. You cannot stop probable cause is very relative, so at the end they will be able to just raise that issue. So so we cannot even work with that. I guess also we can work with different organizations that are here working directly with immigrants and undocumented people. Yeah, I will work inside the agency in the police department first.
Can you repeat the question, please? Can you repeat the question, please?
What do you think the Charlottesville Police Department should be doing, and what can the CRB do to protect undocumented Charlottesville community members from racial profiling and other forms of police abuse?
Well, that's definitely a good question. As far as the undocumented, that also goes back into the low-income community, because that's where majority of undocumented immigrants would be, you know, because they don't have a lot of money, they're struggling like, you know, the low income, so they're going to be harassed as well as we are. I also look at to how they come about to even structure about even harassing the people, because they got quotas that they got to meet at a certain amount of time. They got you know, different things that they got to do within the department that they feel that they have justified that it might not be right for the citizens. But I feel that the CRB board can at least look at some, like they say, the policies and the procedure to see what could be changed in keeping our people safe in Charlottesville. But as far as the Charlottesville Police Department, it just needs an overhaul. It just needs to be cleaned out. Oh, I'm the last.
What's this for?
Next question.
Okay.
Would you be willing to ride with officers and undergo some of the same training on split-second decision-making? Would you be willing to ride with officers and undergo some of the same training on split-second decision-making?
Well, I'd be curious about it. I don't think that's so important for a member of the review board to participate in their training. It's very important, though, for members of the review board to know something about the substance of their training, particularly the values that they're trained to have. And, you know, there's this notorious blue wall of silence. We have somehow to break that down so that honest police are not bound by loyalty to the bad cops. And this is the kind of value that needs to change in the culture of the police force. I don't know exactly how to bring that about, but it seems to me that it's much instead of learning how they do split-second responses, I would be much more myself concerned to know how they're being motivated to serve the community, particularly in regard to minority communities. I think there's a lot of undercurrent of bad teaching going on, and I think we need to focus on getting that out of their training.
No, I don't think I'd be willing to ride with the police. I mean, just like a little child, when they're not with their parents, they act better, you know? So if we were to ride in the police car with the police, I mean, I guess they're gonna try to do their job right then, you know, but no, I would never consider riding in the police car. No, because I ain't trying to get arrested or nothing like that. So I'm not trying to get in no police car unless I have to. That's all it is to it. And no, I don't want to ride nowhere with them because, like I said, they're not going to do their job the way that they would do it if you weren't in that car. So.
I think I would be willing to ride with them and to go through some of the training, but I don't think it's necessary or maybe even important as part of the CRB process. I think understanding the overall process of their training is important, but split-second decision is just part of it. And just like you were saying, they're going to be on their best behavior with the ride-along, so I don't know how much real good information we would get from that. I think it's important for the CRB to do sort of a collection, an information collection phase, to understand policies and procedures, to understand culture, to understand how the police works, and the training is part of that. These two specific things are just a small part. All of their training needs to be considered.
Well, I don't know if I want to ride in a police car, not that I'm afraid or whatever, but I would like to see the reports when it comes back, and maybe the body cam, to see how they made that decision, whatever it was. We should be able to view that kind of stuff, the reports. And then we really want to know how actually they are trained. What kind of training are they taught? Because one time I went to a meeting down at Carver Rec, and I talked to a policeman. He was from the county. And I said, why do you have to shoot? Most of the time you shoot to kill. They said they are taught that way. Why can't you shoot in the arm, foot, leg, anywhere except in the heart or the head? They said this is the way they are taught. And when the young people come out of the academy, they are so scared, I think they just don't, they make a split second just to shoot you, to kill you.
So I've been on police ride-alongs, and I share the concern that when you do that, it might be a sort of Potemkin Village situation where what you're seeing is not what's normally happening. I also understand that the fact that I can do a ride-along with minimal fear is a product of my own privilege. I would do the training, but I would do the training for a completely different reason. I want to know what they're being trained on. And if you do the training, you'll see the training that they're getting. And my guess is it doesn't include, we heard mention what values are being imparted by the training. But another thing beyond, even if they've got the right orientation in terms of values, I'm almost certain that what you're not getting is training in cognitive psychology and cognitive biases, implicit biases, and exposure to debiasing exercises of the kind that even in a split second can prevent a person from associating one race or one group of people with badness and another group of people with goodness, and one group of people with danger and another group of people with safety. So I would want to know what their training is, and I'd want to know if it reaches the level of cognitive psychology.
I find this question really irrelevant. I think it's important that we understand where the training is, but I don't see that it'd be necessary for CRB members to go on this training. If they want to, sure. But I think if they do, and I think this goes for all interactions with the police, that it should be documented. I mean, there's a potential bias to be generated there. It's like, oh, I went on this ride along, the officer was great, you know, maybe some of the assumptions we have about the police are wrong. I think it's important to document these interactions and make sure that the CRB is truly independent. It's a counter question I'd ask, would they be willing to be subject to police violence or to be raised black in this country? I bet they wouldn't. So it's kind of a weird question.
My answer to that question is that I would if we had developed a relationship of respect and trust, that we were at that point of spending hours and hours and hours doing training and ride-alongs. I don't see that being something that these people within this first year will necessarily get to. If that was something that the community was demanding from the CRB, I would also say that I would consider doing that. I watched a feature on a journalist whose name I can't recall off the top of my head, but a man who did ride-alongs in Newark, and I think it was a PBS special, and mostly saw things that disturbed him, some things that he thought were appropriate policing, and some of the police officers that he rode along with ended up later being criminally charged with inappropriate uses of force, and he was like, these are the same people that I rode along with and had these, semi-positive experiences about. And I think this is what everybody is alluding to, which is that ride-alongs aren't necessarily going to provide us with the information that I think the community, the Civilian Review Board needs. I think it would be fascinating. I also agree that I think it would be fascinating because I am a white woman of privilege. And I definitely recognize why other people would not feel comfortable in that situation. But I don't foresee that being something that we would do. Is it something that we would consider doing if it was very important to the community? I would say that would be something we'd all need to discuss and talk about.
I would certainly be not only willing but interested in doing a ride-along so long as there were no handcuffs this time. The last ride-along I did was with handcuffs. And that in itself, and my complaint to the police department, is in itself a story as to why we need a civilian review board. And I would be interested, frankly, myself, I'm not opposing this on others, in taking part in training. I think there's nothing to lose by it. I think there's everything to gain. And I don't think any of us is naive enough to think that riding along with one or two particular police officers who may have been chosen for the task of showing us, or maybe acting particularly good that day, is going to change my views of anything. I've just had too much experience with too many different police departments to be drawn in by one police officer or two, some of whom have been my clients. But even those who have been my clients and I became friends with, the thing that's always concerned me is what somebody referenced, I think it was Jim, is this blue wall of silence. That is that even the best officers that I have represented will not turn in another officer. I mean, and that is what really undermines the ability even of the police administrators to do a good job. And somehow police administrators have to find a way to flush that out, make sure that people who do not tell on their fellow officers are fired. Because that's as serious as doing it yourself. And it's very rare that an officer present on the scene who doesn't stop somebody is charged with anything. But that's what we have to do. Because if they're there to protect us, if they're there to enforce the law, then damn it, enforce the law of what's in front of you. But they don't do that. And that culture has to change.
I am not at all in any way interested in riding in a police car, front seat or back seat. I would be interested to see the split-second decision-making in the simulator, and also to review the test scores of those officers from that simulator testing. I think that that would be important, especially down the line. If there is an incident that comes up, we can look and see, okay, this was a split-second decision that they had to make. When they were in the simulator, how did they handle that same or similar situation? I would also love to see what de-escalation training that they've been given and how they handle those particular instances. I think that that sort of information will be, we could glean much more from that than we could from any perceived or already pre-boxed ride-along with any officer.
The part of the card, I will skip that part because I don't think it's more important, honestly. But the part of the training of the police, yes, definitely. We should take some, or it would be good if we can take some part on the training. Of course, maybe we can help put some input there on certain things, how they should be done, why they're not working on, regarding, of course, a lot of things regarding specifically on the law that we can truly help to make them better after the training in the work. So yes, in the part of the training, of course, we should take a look at that and maybe give an input on that.
The riding in the police car. Oh, well, I done rode in the front and I done rode in the back. But I don't prefer to ride in neither. But, and it would harm my community if I was to ride in a police car. Because I don't know what you might do to me. You could say you taking me for a spin to show me something, but you might show me something else. But no, I don't think we of the CRB should be riding no police car. I think the training that they're learning, they're only in the academy, what, 6 months? And then once they come out, they're continuing other trainings. Now the other training, it should be a community police training that I wouldn't mind going to, where we're all sitting there and we're learning the same thing that they're learning. You know, there's a difference than riding in the car, because what in the world with me riding in the car, what is that gonna teach me? It's not gonna teach me anything, because like a few of my panelists said, they're gonna be on their best behavior. But you have the ones that are already corrupt. Now, that's the one I would wanna ride in the car with, because I wanna see what your corruption is so I can use that to work against you. But no, I don't really think that we should be riding the car. I think we should be in trainings, though, community police training, where that has already been asked a few years back in the DMC task force, that we would be trained with the police officers. You know, the children were trained with the police officers. So, and I think, you need to do a lot of mental health first aid. As a citizen, I feel that it is my responsibility to take training, so that way I can be able to provide for my community against the police if the police isn't trained to be able to handle the community.
I think the charge that the City Council has given to the review board is so immense that riding in the police car is probably not the best use of the time for this committee. The other thing I would like to say, that the person who wrote the question asked a little bit about the split-second decision-making and the training. And to me, the important part of that is understanding the values and concepts that went into the training. I think it's really important, and I'll say it again and again, that those values start with the assumption that all of us are equal and we are entitled to equal protection under the law.
So we do have time for one more. This will be the last question of the evening. You're up first. No, I just want to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. I'm a local. Community policing is when neighbors defend our community without a lot of outside police presence. There are no question marks. I will repeat. 1, I'm a local. Community policing is when neighbors defend their own community without a lot of outside police presence.
Defend their own. That's like vigilantes, isn't it?
There is no question.
How is it supposed to be read?
It's been well supported by the FBI itself that white supremacists in general, open parentheses, and the KKK specifically, close parentheses, have infiltrated police departments nationwide. What are your thoughts on this with respect to identifying and removing such individuals from the police force?
If it's so, yes, they got to go.
Well, I cannot answer that question because, like I said, it's going to take an overhaul of the police station to get all of them out of the police station. Or it's going to take their buddies that know that who they are to turn them in. But I don't know. We're going to have a big fight on our hands getting some of these people out of the police department, I think, because of who's in charge. As I said, Pleasance has been in charge for how long? Oh my God, how long has he been in, you know? I mean, yeah, I'm sorry, but when we go on our rallies and we have our little get-togethers, what do we say? Cops and Klan go hand in hand, and I'm sorry, that's how it is here in Charlottesville. And until you all stop protecting each other, I'm never going to stop feeling that way.
I don't know that I know the answer to this question either. I think it starts somewhere with acknowledging that the white supremacists have infiltrated police and military. We have to acknowledge that that's a truth. And it has to do with looking at the culture of the police, looking at the culture of the military. People up here have said things like the blue wall of silence. And it has to do with personnel, because this is also individuals and how they feel and how they react. And it's a difficult question, it's a difficult problem, and I think that is one of the main things that the CRB needs to investigate and figure out how they're going to deal with that next year.
Well, if you can prove that the Nazis and KKK is in the police force, then they need to go, whoever it is. And the ones that's protecting them, if that's so, they need to go as well, because that's upholding. So, yes, if you can find out who they are, they need to be fired. That's what I have to say about that.
So I think Ms. Baird's right. I mean, you want to find out if you've got people with hateful views, white supremacists, people sympathetic to the KKK in your police forces. And, the fortunate thing about social media and, 20-some-year-olds, which a lot of police officers are, is that they're not very savvy. They'll leave a trail. And so you've got people like Sean King who are rooting out and identifying people with these hateful views. And when they're in positions of power, I couldn't agree more, they have to go. I'm a little bit hesitant about getting too preoccupied with the worst of the worst. Those people need to go, but sometimes it reminds me a little bit of there's an obsession in criminal justice with the innocence problem. And I think it's abhorrent when we convict and punish innocent people, but it's also abhorrent what we do to guilty people, right? And that's the more conventional problem, and that's the problem that reaches a lot more of the people who are in our criminal justice system. And so the same thing with policing. It's abhorrent if people are in the police department who have hateful views. But we need to look at the people who maybe are trying to not have hateful views and are trying to do their job right, neither because they don't have the training or they're acting with implicit bias or they don't have the right leadership, aren't doing their job well, and are part of a system of oppression. So I just would be cautious about stopping at rooting out people with hateful views, explicit hateful views.
Yeah. And I think you were getting at that right, in that obviously, if it were confirmed that we could find someone with explicit neo-Nazi views, yes, they should get out of the police department. But we can't forget that, not every police officer is a white supremacist, but many of them hold white supremacist views. Okay, they may not be explicitly labeled themselves, but they often hold the same views. Same with some people in the military. So I think, as someone said earlier, it's about changing the culture. It's about addressing the systemic reasons of why we see such white supremacy in our policing. And it goes back to the fact that modern policing is descended from slave patrols. And that more often than not, that's what the function of the police is to keep black people in line. It's to keep poor people in line. So yeah, if you throw out a few bad, rotten apples, that's necessary, but you're ignoring the deeper rot that needs to be addressed with radical systemic change.
Yeah, I think that's one of the distracting features. I certainly do not want somebody who is an overt white supremacist KKK member policing in our community, but I think it's distracting to think that the biggest problem is sort of the big bad wolf out there that explicitly states racist views. That I think one of the things when we're talking about split-second decision making, Josh mentioned the bias that comes into our calculation when we make decisions, and I think one of the things that we need to be looking at is, as a culture, police do what, as a culture, America does, which is racially profile people, act in a biased way against those people, and respond accordingly based on centuries of conditioning. And I think police departments should primarily be focused on ways that they can back away from these issues that we all, I think, are conditioned to function under, to say, what can we do to uproot these systemic problems? And so, yes, I believe that if there are infiltration of KKK members in the Charlottesville Police Department, that would be something that would be critical to get to deal with, to remove them from those positions of power. But I think that one of the things that we are supposed to be doing on this Civilian Review Board is to look at the big issues that our community faces. And I think that we all know that racism is a very, very complicated and deeply rooted issue that is not clearly identified by this person is a racist, this person is not a racist, as if there is some sort of, there is no gray area. There is a huge gray area in every single person in this room. There's a huge gray area. It's the way that we have been conditioned growing up in America. And I think that that is one of the things that police departments are learning as black men are being killed by police officers. They're learning, we care about this. This matters to us, that this is not the way that you enforce law and order in our communities.
I think much of what Sarah said is absolutely right on. But it's obvious that we need to do a good job vetting people that we hire, and social media should make it easier. But what I would focus on is conduct, and looking at how police officers interact with the public. And now that every police officer is armed, if we can use that word, with a body cam, and is required to use that body cam in any interaction they have with a citizen, we have the basis upon which to do a review of each of those instances. We need to do a review of every police officer and their interactions with citizens on the street. Because it doesn't matter if they are not racist, but the result is the same problem. I just tried a case in federal court against a police officer in Albemarle County. And the argument was it was a denial of equal protection because he principally stopped and searched black people. Now the fact is, from what I could tell, this guy is not an overt racist. He has friends who are black, but he has the stereotypical notion that's been propagated through the government and through the media that black men driving nice cars are likely to be drug dealers. And he's a drug warrior. So of course we have to deal with the issue of the war on drugs as doing this, but also we have to deal with the stereotypes that fall short of what we would normally call racism in that setting, because we have people making stereotypical decisions that have very negative impact. But we should be able to see that if we have transparency and accountability.
I'm going to offer a little pushback on what Sarah said. I don't think that the gray area is as broad as it may seem. In my opinion, either you're racist or you're not. If you are a Nazi sympathizer, if you embrace white supremacy views, if you're a member of Identity Europa, if you're a skinhead, you should not be walking around with a badge and a gun. It's just that simple. And what we need to do is not only root them out of the police department, but also, if in any way possible, find ways to prosecute them for their actions. It's just that simplistic. We cannot allow that type of particular and that type of behavior to continue throughout our police departments. And the problem is they're not wearing hoods anymore. They're now wearing blue and brown uniforms. So we've got to identify these people. If that means that we've got to go back through records of their arrest and see how they reacted in certain situations, how many people of color, how many minorities that they arrested as opposed to whites, how they were treated during those arrests, then that's the work of what this committee would have to do.
I think that is a tough question or issue to assess as a practical thing that we as a board may be able to do it. I think it more as I can work with that as a philosophical or political question. In the sense, I will share your view. If you can be able to trace and find that some people or a certain person in a specific have been participating in hate groups, of course that person should not be part of a police group enforcing, and simple as that, because there is a clear distinction between, and by constitution, that it is not right. So that person, if I should make an answer, it's not that person should not be in a police group, in a police department, etc. But I will, as a practical way, I will look at that as so Jeff said, in the part of their conduct. If you have the findings, the report that certain people are systematically persecuting, profiling, and stereotyping people, well, that is a thing that we can certainly work with it and maybe move that person so he cannot be able to keep repeating that conduct in the place that he is appointed.
Well, the city of Charlottesville has a lot of KKK and Nazi-minded people. Starting from the top, Gary Pleasance. We have one sitting in here now that has that mindset. I don't know if it's changed over the years, but I know when he first became an officer, that was that mindset, and that's how I ended up going to jail. And then that's when a riot started, and incited the riot. That's what brings out the good old boys. So when you come to a black neighborhood and there's a riot, the good old boys take over and make the black officers stay a distance. See, so there is a difference that people don't understand by the white privilege and being black, because you don't get to see the outcomes, the worst of outcomes than you normally would see in a white neighborhood. So it comes from the typical training of the militant training when they're trained coming in to be police officers. Their thoughts, whatever their thoughts are, and PTSD, all of that plays a part in the hiring of the police officers. And then when they get to certain areas, depending on where you're from, that's what trains you. You know, the superior of the white man is what's gonna train you, how you're gonna react in your community. You have blacks that even come here from other from neighboring counties, and then they get here, they act just like their tokens, and they become against their own black people. So racism in the department plays a very big part, you know, because like I say, I've watched so many different police interactions with people, and it's just overpowering with white people over top of black people. That's all I can pretty much say to that.
I think you probably know what I'm going to say. I really think that we all have to get into this with the mindset that all of us are created equal. We all deserve equal protection under the law, and the charge for this board is to build that community of trust that can become enlarged to make Charlottesville a community of trust.
I think the review board has got to operate under the principle of zero tolerance for any overt conduct of a racist nature in the police force, zero tolerance for policies within the police force that are friendly or amenable to racist behavior by the police force themselves. The fact that there are more white supremacists and neo-Nazis trying to get in the police force as well, the idea of vetting recruits is good, but the purpose of the review board has just got to be focused on what people do and what the policies of the department are as we find them. And as I say, zero tolerance. It sounds militant only if you think that some degree of tolerance of racist behavior is okay. It's not. So if the review board is focused and vigilant, then they're going to do the job. But, and it doesn't matter that, I mean, we've always seen the Klan has been loaded with police from all its history, and we know that there are already and have forever been racists in the police department anyhow. So of course there are going to be new ones trying to come along and get there. We just have to keep our eyes peeled, spot what we do, and try to make it be different than it's been.
So with that said, give them one big round of applause, please.
Now, before we close the evening, we have a couple of announcements. There will be more opportunities for feedback from the public. Members of the public will be given several opportunities for feedback on the applicants. Just a moment. Sorry. One opportunity is the survey that you might have filled out this evening. Be sure that you turn that in tonight before you leave. Excuse me. All right. Also, there'll be feedback opportunities which will include online forms, paper response forms, email, phone feedback options, and a public hearing at one of the upcoming regular city council meetings tentatively scheduled for the May 21st meeting. Also, each of the applicants and facilitators have submitted 200-word bios, which can be viewed on the Police Civilian Review Board webpage. The bios will remain in place through the conclusion of the Civilian Review Board selection process.
And with that said, Thank you very much for participating. We appreciate your questions from our community. To our applicants, I'm wishing you well on your journey and your appointment, and thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.